you just spend less.
Okay, well that leads into the second part of the question. The second part of the question is, do you plan to exercise your 10th Amendment rights and get the federal government out of Pennsylvania's public education system, and how would that work?
I don't know that we can, in education-wise, in the fact that the dollars, as you know, go basically directly to the school districts. The state is challenging. Governor Corbett, as Attorney General, challenged the federal government on the health care issue, and that's following through, and we're doing rather well. We'll wait now and see what the Supreme Court does. The problem is you have to look at the bench. As you've already seen, a lot of the stuff ends up in the federal courts, and that was the point I was going to make in the last question, is the people who are appointing these judges. Remember, the Congress passes laws. The state legislature passes laws. The problem is how the courts interpret those. So who's governor, or who you elect to the state courts, or who you elect as president who's appointing these federal judges, make these laws many times worse than what they really are when they're first passed. That doesn't make them good when they're passed, but the truth is that's where it ends up. And when you challenge this, remember, I'm pro-life. And I was part of the debate several years ago when we were discussing challenging the federal government on partial birth abortion, because we were going to ban those in Pennsylvania. The problem was that for us who were in the pro-life movement, it would cost us millions and millions of dollars in Pennsylvania to fight it in the federal courts. That is the biggest problem you have, is the cost, because you got to hope you get the right judges. It's drug out for years. The fortunate thing for, I think, the attorney generals are in the healthcare cost is it's moving very rapidly through, which will benefit us as taxpayers. Instead of billions and millions of tax dollars from Pennsylvania and across this nation, there'll be less dollars because it's going almost directly to the court, to the Supreme Court. So when you challenge, I would love to challenge the 10th Amendment. I personally think, and we've joked about this, about changing the amendment to the Constitution that says that state U.S. senators are elected by the people. We sometimes have joked about making it responsible to the state legislatures, actually so we could enforce the 10th Amendment. What has happened is, if you look at the United States Senate, they're all millionaires. Most of them have bought their seats in the United States Senate. It hasn't been, and it's tough. If anyone in this room wants to run for something like that, even if you have money, it's tough because of the way the system works anymore. And I joke with people, but it's the truth. And look at this. How many politicians do you know that run that are bald-headed? How many politicians do you know that win and run that have beards? It's become, for all of us, an issue that we need to pay more attention to issues than we do to public appearance. So often we vote because somebody is tall. Think of the last time we elected a short president. So all I'm trying to say to you is the 10th Amendment is something we need to get back to, but it's not as easy as you think. We as voters have got to be the one who does that by who we elect to the Senate and to the United States Congress. The courts are never going to probably, at least under this president, let us ever get to where we need to challenge that.
Just Sam, go ahead.
I was just going to say, as the only senator up here, I need to respond to See, we now heard how he feels about federal senators, and there was a representative recently who he shares an office with who recommends we get rid of the state senate altogether. So I don't know if Stan shares that view or not. And then he talks about my bald head and I'm not very tall, so. But I guess the one point I did want to make, I think a couple things. One, I think Stan made a good point in that the case against the federal government regarding the health care, I think will be very instructive in terms of how that turns out. With the state taking on the federal government in a particular situation. So we'll see how that turns out. There may be some lessons to be learned in some other areas as well. Secondly, I just want to mention that I agree with the premise that a lot of the regulations that are coming down from the federal government are just mandates that are adding to the cost of education. And I'm one of those that thinks that many of those mandates are well-intentioned. I think No Child Left Behind was an attempt to improve our education. In fact, You look at one of the most conservative presidents we had, Ronald Reagan, he came down on the side of federal regulations and accountability in education. The impact of those sometimes is different, and we see the cost that it adds, and so I think we need to look at them. In fact, I think this may be a future another question later, but we have to look at the mandates on the state side as well. So I'll wait until, just remember that's a question later, so I'll wait to talk about that.
Let's move on to the next question. We got a lot of questions. Okay, next question is, drum roll please. Construction projects consume a significant part of school budgets. The labor costs are inflated by 1/3 due to the prevailing wage mandates. How can you as a legislator defend this mandate? What do you plan to do to alleviate this burden on school districts? And would you support House Bill 709, the School Construction Cost Reduction Act? And that's a mouthful. So,
I guess I'll start as chair of the House Labor Committee now. Labor and Industry Committee, thank you, we renamed that. Look folks, we're going to try to tackle this issue. You will see published in next week sometime. Within 2-3 weeks we're going to have some hearings on prevailing wage. We're going to try to figure out how we can either eliminate, which may be very difficult to do, but if we can eliminate, at least have a major impact on the index that it's fixed to. Right now it's basically the union wage. There is data collected by the Department of Labor and Industry that would be a much fairer index and would get us to a better level. I don't know how you totally defend the prevailing wage. I understand how it came about historically. It doesn't make much sense to me anymore. And we're going to try to do something about it. But it is going to be difficult. Well, it sounds great. Somebody said, just eliminate it. That's great. I can get the votes out of my committee to eliminate it. I don't know if I can get them out of the House, and I don't think I can get them out of the Senate at all. Lloyd might disagree with me. Well, we could try, but then I put people up that are good conservative members willing to make that vote from the Southeast and will lose the next election, and we have no chance of getting it. So you have to get what you can. And that's what the hearings are about, trying to get what we can. Trying to do the best we possibly can and move this forward. If I can get it all, I'll get it all. I just don't know as how that's possible.
Well, and I'll respond to that if I may. I worked in the private construction industry, owned a business there for years, saw firsthand the impact of the cost of prevailing wage on jobs. I mean, 15–20% is probably about the average increase in the cost of a job. So it has a definite impact on our tax dollars when every project that has any amount of state funding in it is increased by 15–20%, at least here in York County and Lancaster County. It's they're different in different parts of the state. But so I wholeheartedly support the complete repeal of prevailing wage. I think and I know that Representative Miller does as well, and we appreciate Representative Miller's lead on this issue in the House, and we have an opportunity. It is a tough issue in the legislature. It will be a tough issue in the Senate, and so I hope that we can make some changes. I'm with Ron. I'm not sure that we have the votes to repeal it as much as I'd like to, and we'll fight for it. But certainly it won't be for lack of trying on our parts. I've introduced 3 bills, and there are a number of ways to tackle it. If if you can't eliminate it altogether, there are a number of things that we can do that would greatly reduce the impact on the cost of a construction project. And I think Ron has just mentioned probably the one that seems to make the most sense, and we may have the best chance of passing, and that is pegging what they call the prevailing wage to the occupational wage survey that currently is done all across the state. And that's one of the bills that I've introduced. There's several others that would make changes that would have some other impacts as well. But clearly, of all the mandates that we place on our schools, eliminating this one would have a huge impact on the cost of the projects and subsequently on the tax dollars. So it's a really, really important issue, and then look forward to continuing to work with Representative Miller on that.
there's two parts of this issue that I think also are more of an issue for us in the South